So these stories are trying to express what you might describe as an unchanging, transcendent reality. You know, it's something like what's common across all human experience across all time. And that's what Jung essentially meant by an archetype. And you could say, well, you know, we tend to think that what we see with our senses is real. And of course that's true, but what we see with our senses is what's real that works at the time frame that we exist in, right? And so we see things that we can touch and pick up. We see tools, essentially, that are useful for our moment-to-moment activities. We don't see the structures of eternity, especially not the abstract structures of eternity. We have to imagine those with our imagination. Well, and that's partly what these stories are doing. They're saying, well, there's forms of stability that transcend our capacity to observe, which is hardly surprising. We know that if we're scientists, right? Because we're always abstracting out things that we can't immediately observe. But there are metaphysical or moral realities or phenomenological realities that have the same nature, that you can't see them in your life by observing them with your senses, but you can imagine them with your imagination. And sometimes the things that you imagine with your imagination are more real than the things that you see. Well, numbers are like that, for example. I mean, there's endless examples of that. And I would say, well, this is also a good way of thinking about fiction, because a good work of fiction is more real than the stories from which it was derived. Otherwise it has no staying power, right? It's distilled reality, even though in some sense it never happened. It's like, well, it depends on what you mean by happened. You know, it's a pattern that repeats in many, many places with variation. You extract out the central pattern. It's the pattern purely never existed in any specific form, but the fact that you've pulled a pattern out from all those exemplars means that you've extracted something real.